Hello and welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Bryant and I'll be your host for this webinar. Please make sure your microphones and web cameras are disabled during the presentation to provide for a smooth recording. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You are welcome to use the chat box at any time during the webinar for comments and insights. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar is next week on August 19th, How to Ask Your DNA Question with Bonnie Belza. That'll be at the same time, Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. If you'd like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from Kathryn Grant, who will be giving a presentation on how to repair incorrect merges in Family Tree. After years on the sidelines, Kathryn began doing family history and discovered that she loved it. Her specialty is helping new family historians find success, and maybe even avoid some of the mistakes she's made. Kathryn teaches Sunday classes at the BYU Family History Library. She also presents at Riverton, Utah Saturday seminars and other family history events. Her column on family history ran in the Nauvoo Times for about a year and is still available online. In addition, she's a regular contributor to the FamilySearch blog. Kathryn works as a technical writer and instructional designer with a focus on usability and process improvement. Besides family history, she loves uplifting music, thought-provoking books, and springtime. And if Kathryn is ready, then we'll turn the time over to her.
Thank you, Bryant. I appreciate that. So I will just share my screen here and get over to my presentation. And I think we are ready to start. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar. I feel like this is probably one of the most relevant topics that we could be talking about right now, how to fix incorrect merges in FamilySearch's family tree. So let's take a look at what we've got on the schedule for this webinar. First of all, we're going to talk about how you can spot an incorrect merge. After that, we will actually see a demo of how to undo an incorrect merge. And then we'll talk about what kind of cleanup is necessary after repairing an incorrect merge. So how do you spot an incorrect merge? There is actually one very simple guideline that I found most useful, and that is look for stuff that doesn't make sense, such as a child who's christened before they were born. Not possible, right? A child with multiple sets of parents who are all biological. A child born before a parent's birth or after a parent's death. Are you kind of seeing the track here we're going on? These things just are logically impossible. A child born when the parents are too young. A woman doesn't have children when she's 3. Children born too close together, children spaced too far apart. I remember seeing a family where there was a group of children that was born, I don't remember the exact date, but let's just say for the sake of example, it was around 1850. And then suddenly they had another batch of children around 1890 or something with a 20-year gap in between. Probably not going to happen, and at least it's a red flag that we would want to look into, and usually it's because of a bad merge. An unlikely number of children. Have you seen children or parents with 30 kids in family tree? They're out there, and it's usually because, again, because of bad merges. There's even more red flags we can watch for. Unlikely birthplaces for children. And if you have watched some of the earlier webinars that we had, I gave an example. So just imagine here that you're looking at a map of England, because I don't have one on here. But some of the kids were born over here on the West Coast. Well, actually, let me back up. So the first kid was born in the West Coast. The next kid was born up north. The next kid was born on the East Coast. And then they kept cycling around England, which it was not going to happen, especially in the 1800s. What it turned out was that 3 families had been merged together, and there was a family with that name who lived on the West Coast, one who lived up north, and one who lived on the East East Coast. So when you see unlikely birthplaces for children like that, that can be a red flag for an incorrect merge. Conflicting information in the other information section. An example I saw recently was that there were 2 conflicting residents for the same year. Not possible, right? And excuse me, I should explain. They were 2 residences from a census. So you wouldn't have a family enumerated in 2 different places in a census. If you see a person getting married after their death, in other words, their marriage date is after their death date, that doesn't work. Conflicting sources, for example, and this I'm talking about on the Sources tab, where you see 2 different censuses for the same year or 2 different christenings for different years when a person would only have been christened once. Overlapping marriages, when a person is married to a second spouse while he's still alive and having children with the first spouse. I've seen records where there might be 3 or 4 overlapping spouses, and those are all red flags for incorrect merges. Now, I wanted to point something out, especially as Bryant said when he introduced me. I love working with new users. Just really, what he said was true. I really do hope to help people avoid some of the crazy mistakes that I made. And one of the things I think we all maybe tend to do when we're new users is that we put too much trust in technology. So in other words, if there's a conflict between common sense and technology, especially when we're unsure of ourselves, we'll trust technology instead of ourselves. So one thing I'm hoping will come about from this webinar is that you will have more confidence in yourself and realize that if you think something doesn't make sense, you're probably right. Because again, as we've talked about in past webinars, Family Tree is a shared tree and the data comes from many different users, many different sources. And so it is possible that there are mistakes in the data in Family Tree. And so trust that gut instinct that you have, or prompting of the spirit, or just common sense. If you think something's wrong, definitely it's worth looking into. And don't dismiss your own feelings just because you think, well, if it's a contest between me or technology, technology's probably right. In the case of Family Tree, that's often not the case. I did want to point out one other thing before we start looking at examples of bad merges, and that is that if we're not aware of the possibility of bad merges, then it's easy to misdiagnose the problem. Let me give you an actual example. So user 1 added John Pringle with the correct death year of 1855. Then user 2 came along and she had found a John Pringle who did not die in 1855. So he's got the same name, but a different death year. And this second John Pringle was having children well after 1855. For whatever reason, user number 2 did not notice this, and so she did the merge, and suddenly we've got a John Pringle dying. This merged John Pringle is dying in 55, but having a boatload of kids after 55. Well, then user 3 comes along and realizes, well, obviously that can't be correct. This man can't be having children after he dies. So she concludes that the death date is wrong, and she estimates it to be after the last child is born. So she actually makes that change in the death, and it's all documented in the change log. But the trouble was, the solution was to undo the incorrect merge, not to change that death date, because the death date was right for one of the John Pringles and the second one should never have been merged in. Does that make sense? So because this user, number 3, apparently didn't realize that she needed to check for a bad merge, she did the logical thing, and it ended up corrupting this record even further. So whenever you see contradictory information, that is, in my experience, almost always a sign of a bad merge. So let's actually walk through an example of how we can see that there's a bad merge. So here's Alice Simpson. She was, well, let me just ask you, what do you see on this screen that would lead you to believe that there might be a problem? And if you'd like to, you can put that in the chat or you can just answer to yourself. This one's pretty easy. I've seen ones that are a lot worse. But in this particular case, as you probably noticed, the birth is after the christening, and that can't happen. The child has to be alive to be christened. So we've definitely got a problem here. Probably a child born in 1798 has been incorrectly merged with a child who was born around 1796. So to look into this a little further, one of the next things that you might want to do is look at the sources. So as you look at the sources for this Alice, what do you notice? Yeah, she's got a christening in 1796, and when we open up this christening, here's the date. It's 13 July 1796. She is the daughter of Armstrong Simpson, a nice unique name, and her mother Margaret. When we open up the other source, we see that we've got an Alice Simpson who is christened on a completely different date, 17th of June, 1798, but she is the child of the same parents. For those of you who have done a little bit of research in England, I'm guessing that you're probably starting to see the problem here. And that is that at this time period in England, it was often the custom that if one child died and then there was a later child of the same gender, they would give the same name to the second child. In other words, they'd reuse the older sibling's name who had died for a younger sibling. And just based on the likelihood of that happening, I think it's probably a pretty good chance that that's what we've got going on here. So the next step is to look for the incorrect merge that we suspect exists. So over on in the latest changes box on the right side, I kept my left and right mixed up. I had to make sure I was saying it correctly. So on the right side of the person page in Family Tree, you'll see a box titled Latest Changes. To look at the whole change log, you just click Show All, and it opens up the change log. FamilySearch has recently completely revamped the changelog, and there is a cool new feature that very easily lets you filter out anything that you don't want to see. There was a filtering option on the old one, but it was a lot harder to use. This new one is just amazing. So because I only want to see merges, I'm going to click Filter, and then in the selection of filters that comes up, I'm going to click Merges. And when I do that, this is what I'm going to see, only the merges that are in this changelog. Everything else, birth dates, parents, whatever all, that's all been hidden for now. So as I look at this merge, I see that there was an Alice, and the date says 1798, and I see that the deleted Alice was also 1798. What's going on with that? Well, I wanted to point out something that I discovered by experience, which actually surprised me. And I actually tested this out, so I know that what I'm saying right now is accurate, at least as of the time this webinar was recorded, because I hope they fix this someday. But this in my mind is a serious problem. It's probably the biggest problem in the changelog. And that is that if you see a little logo or a little avatar off to the side of the person, that lets you know that this information reflects the most current information on that person. It does not necessarily reflect the information that was accurate at the time of the merge. So, and you can test this yourself in beta if you want. Go into somebody, make a change, and then look through the change log, and you'll see that the change you made is reflected throughout the changelog even before you made the change. So the bottom line is you can't necessarily trust the names and dates here to be what they were at the time of the merge. There's a chance that they are not accurate, that they're not the same as they were at the time of the merge. I hope that makes sense, but if not, please ask and we'll discuss that further at the end of the webinar. So you've probably noticed from some other webinars that I love FamilySearch's beta site. For those of you who may not have used it, there's a site at beta beta.familysearch.org. So instead of www.familysearch, you go to beta.familysearch.org, and it's basically a sandbox. It's a place with data. They refresh the data once a year in December. That's been the pattern so far. So the data in there right now is as of December of last year. So it's actually pretty current. You're only missing like this 8 months of current data. But other than that, beyond that, it's the same thing that you'd find in Family Tree. So the cool thing about beta is that it's completely disconnected from the live system, and you can get in beta, you can unmerge, you can remerge, you can play with sources, you can do whatever you want to do in a safe environment, both to learn and to test things out, like what is going to happen if I undo this merge. So that's what I wanted to do in this case, was say what's going to happen if I undo this merge for Alice because it looks like it's not right. Well, here are snapshots of the change logs of each of the Alices after I undid the merge in beta. And you notice that the first Alice, who was, she ends in 18Z, has a correct christening date now of 1796. And the other Alice, who ends in 16X for her PID, her ID number, has a christening date in 1798. So once I split them out, I could see the accurate dates, even though when we look in the change log, those dates were not correct. So I'm now very confident that these two girls are two separate girls born a couple years apart, and I also strongly suspect that the one in 1796 died. But it's always a good idea to verify. And you'll run into similar situations like that. Suppose that you see a merge where you think 2 or 3 families have been incorrectly merged together. Well, if you find those families all separate in the census, like say in the 1871 census, then you've got definite proof that those families are different. So in this case, I want to look for a burial for Alice. And because her younger sister was christened in 1798, that burial would need to take place before this date in order for the family to reuse the name. Because if the child survived, there would be no need to reuse, no, they just wouldn't reuse the name because the older child would have it. So I turned to FamilySearch historical records, and guess what? In the parish register of burials for St. Paul's Blackburn, which is where the girls were christened, there was a death, a burial in 1797 for Alice, the daughter of Armstrong and Margaret. She was aged 13 months. So she died before her younger sister was christened. And this information fits with what we saw in the change log. So if she was christened in July of 1796, then most likely she was born within a month earlier of that time. And that completely adds up with that 13 months for her to be dying on July 17th of the following year. So we're now very comfortable that the first Alice died and that they are two separate people. So now that we've identified the incorrect merge, how do we fix it? Well, it turns out that there are 2 options for fixing a merge in Family Tree, and they depend on the situation of the record. So the first option is if no changes have been made since the merge, then there will be an unmerge button in the change log. You click it and you're done. But if changes have been made since the merge, that unmerge button will not be available, and instead you'll need to restore the person using a different process. So let's look at each one of those. First, we're going to look at the easy one, and I apologize, I think I misspoke. This first one isn't for Alice. This is actually going to be a different one that had an unmerge button available because no changes had been made since the merge. So here's Samuel. He was incorrectly merged with another Samuel who was born in a completely different year and place. And so to undo this merge, we want to click Show All, same as we did before, and we're taken into the change log. In the change log, we don't even have to use the filter option because the unmerge option is right at the top, again, because no changes have been made since the merge. And so we click Unmerge, and we are given the opportunity to review the reason statement that the person gave for doing the incorrect merge. I do want to point out here that I've noticed reason statements are something that many of us struggle with. And so if you see a reason statement, like this one says same person, that doesn't mean it was the same person. What it means is the person who did the merge believed it was the same person, and most likely with the best of intentions. But because of the research that I was able to do, I was able to determine that these two guys actually are not the same person. So despite this reason statement, I'm going to go ahead and undo the merge. The next thing further down this little pop-up is the opportunity for us to explain why the unmerge is correct. When I give a reason statement, I always like to include the full name and the PID, again, because I want a snapshot of the correct information at the time of the merge. And if somebody makes changes later to this information, then it's going to be reflected throughout the change log, as we saw, and it could be misleading. So I note here that this first Samuel was born in 1826 in Gorton, Lancashire, and the other one was born in 29 in Chesterfield, so that even though they have the same name, their birth information indicates that they are not the same person. And then I just click on Merge, and voila, both records are returned to their pre-merge state. It's actually as though the merge never happened. Everything is just back to exactly the way it was before the bad merge was done. Okay, that's the easy scenario, but I would say probably 95% of the time, you're going to run into the second scenario. So as we said, merges can only be undone with that unmerge button if no changes have been made. Why would that be? Why are merges disabled if any changes have been made since the merge? Think about that for a sec. Well, think if you were the programmer that was writing code for FamilySearch to determine what to do with those changes that have been made since the merge. Do they apply to the merge survivor? Do they apply to the deleted person? Are they maybe wrong for both people because this merge has just been the result of confusion? Maybe they apply to both, maybe they apply to neither. The trouble is Family Tree can't tell where to put those changes when they split the people apart. So the changes, what will happen, let's walk through actually and see what happens on that. In a nutshell, the changes will stay on the merged survivor, and they will not, the undeleted record will go back to the way it was. So let's walk through and see how that works. So we've got our merge here. It's the fourth entry down in the change log. So it's not right at the top. And you notice that because of these changes that have been made since, there is no unmerge button. We don't have that option. The option that we do have is to undelete, but it's not really obvious from here how to do that. So this is how you undelete a person who's been incorrectly merged. You actually click the name of the person. And when you do that, you're going to get the summary card come up, and you click their name again. You can also click person if you want, but they do the same thing. So we're going to click the name in this case. And when you bring up the person page of the deleted person, you'll have the option to restore that person. So see why I said that wasn't immediately obvious, but once you know how to get to it, it's not that hard to do. So we're going to click restore person. And we come up with a similar screen to what we had before. We can look at the reason statement, but if we're very confident that we are supposed to unmerge, then we go ahead and do this. So here I just explained kind of what I already mentioned, that these two girls are sisters. They died 2 years apart, and there's the custom of reusing a name. So after I do that reason statement, then I click restore. And when you restore a deleted person, this is what happens. The restored record is returned to its pre-merge state. So that one we just undeleted goes exactly the way it was before the incorrect merge. But the other record, what we would have called the surviving record, even though now the merge has been undone, the surviving record is not changed except for temple ordinances, which actually are restored to their pre-merge state. And the reason FamilySearch can do that is that the ordinances are kept in a separate database from the family tree data. So FamilySearch has a record of how the ordinances were, and they restore them so that they are correct. So you don't have to worry about that. But the rest of the information that was wrong on this record is still wrong. And that's why cleanup is so important to do, because of those mistakes still staying there. And when we're new at this, we wouldn't suspect that, right? We would expect, well, gosh, we just undid the bad merge, so doesn't everything go back to normal? Not in the case of restoring a deleted person. So let's go to the last part of our webinar today. How do you do a post-repair cleanup, and why is it important? Well, why is it important? Because if we leave incorrect information on a record, then that incorrect information, sources, and relationships will continue to attract more incorrect record hints, more incorrect possible duplicates, and more incorrect relationships. Now, after you've put all your hard work into sorting out this record, it would be a bit like this. Oh, I forgot, I wanted to mention these incorrect hints and so forth will come both from FamilySearch and from other users. So FamilySearch's hint algorithms and duplicate hinting relies on the information on the person page. It has to. There's no other way for it to work. And so when we've got bad information on the page as the result of a bad merge, well, then FamilySearch is going to give us bad data, and other users are going to see that, and they are going to add more incorrect information as well. And so after you put all the hard effort into cleaning something up, this is what could happen, is all your hard work will crash to the ground when somebody redoes the bad merge, and possibly even more bad merges, and it's as if all your effort had never been made. So let's walk through doing a post-repair cleanup for the Alices that we just unmerged, or I should say that we just repaired, because unmerge really means that you click the unmerge button, but we have undone the bad merge by undeleting the Alice that should not have been merged. So after the undelete, the record for Alice 16X is now correct because it was restored to its pre-merge state. So you notice down here there's only one christening date. We don't have a conflicting birth date. When we go to the sources tab, there's only one source and it matches the christening exactly. So it's all good. This record is now clean. But when we look at her sister 18Z, she still has all the incorrect information. So she's still got her sister's birth date, which is after her christening. She still has an incorrect residence in the other information section, and our gal was deceased by 1798. Remember, she died in 1797. And then also these 1798 sources are her sister's sources, not hers, because she again died, or excuse me, was born in 96, died in 97. So the other thing about this, even though this wasn't an error on the original record, at the time this record was created, the burial information was not included. But remember, we found the burial record. So not only can we add the burial information, but we can also add death information, because we know that if an infant was buried, they had to have died within just a few days of that burial. It would never be more than a few days. So we have got a number of things to do to clean up, and let me put your mind at ease. We're actually not going to walk through doing each of these. That would have added another probably half an hour to the webinar. And besides, the purpose of the webinar wasn't to do common things like correcting data or adding or removing sources. It was really to focus on the principles of repairing the merge. So the principle that the point I'm trying to make here is that when you do post-repair cleanup, there's probably going to be a lot of little nitpicky things that need to be done. And I found it super helpful to make a list of the corrections that are needed. If I don't make a list, I find that I'll do one correction and then I'll say, oh shoot, what was the other one? And then I'll have to think and reorient myself. Oh yeah, I got to add the burial, and then I'll go do that. Now what was the next one? And it just it's more stressful and less efficient, and it wastes time. And it's just so much easier to make this little checklist for yourself. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. Put it in Notepad, write it on a piece of paper, whatever you want. But before you actually start tackling it, you'll probably save yourself a lot of time and stress by making this little list. So this is the list we came up with. Alice 18Z has a wrong birth date that we've got to remove, wrong residence we want to remove. We want to remove the incorrect sources, detach them. We want to add the death and burial information and attach the burial source that we found. And then for 16X, that's the younger sister born in 98, we want to add the correct birth date, add the correct sources. And when I tried to do that in preparation for this webinar, I found that FamilySearch was still suggesting an incorrect source in the record hints. So I want to mark that one not a match so that will reduce the likelihood of bad merges in the future. So like those cooking shows where somebody throws something in the oven and then fast forward, we're just going to take it out of the oven. That's what's going to happen here. We have now magically made all these corrections on the record. And let's look at how Alice 18Z ended up. She's the younger sister. So now she's got a correct christening. She does not have an incorrect birth. She has a correct inferred death date, month and year, based on the burial, and she has a correct burial date. She has only the correct residence, and she has only the correct sources, the christenings in 96 and the burial in 97. For the other Alice, the one that was born in 1798, she now has completely correct information, just a christening in 98 and only the christening in 98 sources. Now you may have noticed that before the correction, the other Alice had 3 records in 98. I detached those and then tried to add all 3 back to the correct person. I could only find these 2, and I have no idea why. But I thought I would mention that just in case anybody said, hey, you had 3 98 sources on the other one. But I'm actually not too worried about this because these are duplicate sources. And so the fact that we're missing that other one that I can't find is not a huge deal as far as proving the christening date or supporting the christening date. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our webinar today. Just by way of summary, we talked about red flags for spotting an incorrect merge. Then we walked through the 2 ways that you can undo an incorrect merge. You can either have an unmerge button if no changes have been made, or if the unmerge button isn't available, then you can restore it using the process that we walked through. And then finally, we gave an illustration of post-repair cleanup. So everybody, thank you so much for coming to the webinar today. And I'm going to go ahead and open up the chat and see what questions we have. So I am going to need to scroll to the top of this chat. Okay, so Randy asks, how can you access the Sunday class notes? Actually, Randy, this is a very good opportunity. Thank you for sending that message, because this is a good opportunity to advertise that the BYU Family History Library has started Sunday classes. And so if you go to our website, there's a schedule for the Sunday classes telling what's coming up. The one this Sunday is actually on duplicates. It's on how to do merges. So it's kind of a class that would have come before this one that talks about how to undo a bad merge. Randy, to answer your question about the class notes, there's a link to those notes on the Sunday class page on the BYU Family History Library website. If you can't find that, go ahead and shoot me an email, and I will put my email, well, it's up on the screen. See, kathryn@gmail.com, but I'll also put it in the chat. If I can't talk and type at the same time, you guys. kathryn@gmail.com. And so please do feel free to email me if you have questions or try something that we talked about in the webinar and it doesn't work. So let's see, that answers Randy's question. Next question, how do I deal, this is from Teresa, how do I deal with a source that belongs to the person it is attached to, but the triangle icon has an exclamation mark saying to detach it? Teresa, that is a good question, because that I found that very confusing when I first ran across that. What it means when you see that triangle is actually that the source is not attached to the person you're currently looking at. And if you click that detach button, or I think even if you hover over it, it will tell you the PID of the person it's currently attached to. So if you know that source should be on the person you're looking at, then you detach it using that detach button, and then the source linker will give you the opportunity to attach it to the current person. So thank you very much for that question. Natalie asks, is there a handout? Natalie, there's not. I stopped making handouts because they get out of date 5 minutes after the presentation. And so, I mean, things are just changing so quickly. But at this site right here, tinyurl.com/fh resources, that has a list of all my presentations, all the slide decks. And so you can actually look at this slide deck. And whenever I make changes to it, this link will always stay the same. So you'll always get the most up-to-date version. I actually should point out this deck is not there yet. And so because I'm just barely giving the webinar today. So I will get that up later today, and then it will be available for you. You can view the webinar, or excuse me, view the slides, or you can actually save a copy if you'd like to, if you wanted to do this training for people that you're helping out at a family history center or whatever. And you're very, very welcome to use these slides in any way that would be helpful. Okay, Annette points out rightly that just because there's a significant gap in children, it doesn't necessarily mean an incorrect merge. That's absolutely right. So it just means, and you know, sometimes women might have a long streak of miscarriages, sadly. And so there's multiple reasons for why there would be a gap, but it can at least be something worth checking out. Okay, Maureen, I hope I'm saying your name right, or maybe Maureen. You ask, if you unmerge, what keeps it from not giving the duplicate hint again? Oh my goodness, very, very good question. What will make it, there's no guarantees, right? But what will keep it, what will make it less likely is for you to add more information. So for instance, to our Alice, we added a definite death date and burial date. And so, and I checked actually, and FamilySearch is not giving a hint for those two Alices to be the same. And I don't know if they ever did actually, because I just came across this bad merge, but it's very likely, to be honest with you, that the reason that the person merged the two Alices was because they got a hint that they should be merged. So the best way to avoid incorrect merges in the future is to add enough information to distinguish those two people. And then if the incorrect hints still show up, then you can click that review merge button and you can choose not a match. And you can mark that person not a match so that other people won't potentially make the mistake of merging them. Thank you very much for that question. Okay, Randy comments, I found in yearly Indian census records the same person being shown in 2 different communities. Randy, thank you. That doesn't happen very often, although it may be more common with Native American research. I'm actually not sure because I'm not an expert there, but I also did come across a person, and I think it's just one time in the 20 some odd years I've been researching, but apparently it was in a US census. I want to say it was the 1880, but I'm not sure. But between the time that so the guy was in place A when the census was taken and he was enumerated there, and then something like 3 days later he went to place B, and it turned out that the enumeration took place in place B after he got there. And I absolutely knew it was the same guy because he had relatives and the same unusual name, the same birth information. I absolutely knew it was the guy, but he was enumerated in 2 places. Let's see, why are we using C. Mercier? I don't know, I'm giving it the French pronunciation. Why are we using Family Tree instead of Family Search? Is Family Tree for your phone? Wow, I'm very, very glad that you answered that question, or asked that question, which we will hopefully now answer. Family Search and Family Tree, let me explain. Family Search is both an organization and it's the whole website. So FamilySearch.org is a website that includes a number of different things. In fact, I think I might even have it up. Yes, so here is FamilySearch.org. As you look at Family Search, you notice that it has these different components. It has Family Tree, which is where the shared pedigree is being built. It has Search, which is where the historical records are. It has Memories, which is where photos and stories and such are stored. It has Indexing, and it has fun activities that you can do just to get familiar with family history, like what's one, compare a face and things like that. So Family Tree is actually a subsection of the whole Family Search website. And again, it is the place where we're building that shared pedigree, and it was actually the location for all the stuff that we did today. So everything we did today took place in the Family Tree section of Family Search, of the Family Search website. Now, that being said, there is a Family Tree app. Okay, you know what? I'm getting on my phone right now because I actually don't remember if that's the name of it, if it's called just Tree or Family Tree. So I'm going into it. It's called Family Tree. So the mobile app is called Family Tree, and that gives you the same information as Family Tree on the Family Search website. I hope that makes sense. Okay, Maureen, thank you. You said, did you get my email? And I believe you put it in the very first question, or maybe not. Maureen, I am not sure I did get your email. Well, I actually don't have my personal email up right now. And so if you emailed me, I'm sure that I will get it. But maybe you want to send me, you can change the chat to just send a private email if you don't want to broadcast it. And you could just send that to me privately so that I have it just in case your email doesn't come through. But yeah, she said, Maureen says, where do you start when the merges have snowballed? And we actually have a webinar on that. It's called How to Fix Sticky, Tricky Problems in Family Tree. So I would recommend probably first watching that webinar, and then if you have questions afterwards, please do shoot me an email, and I'd be very glad to assist with that. Yeah, it's not simple, but there are some methods that you can use that will make it easier and make it more likely that it will be done correctly. So Mardi says, if a person is found in 2 censuses in the same year, check the date the census was taken. Yep, exactly, Mardi. That's a very good observation. Okay, it looks like we have gotten to the end of our questions. So if there aren't any others, I'll go ahead and turn the time back over to Bryant.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kathryn, for the great presentation.
Thank you.
And let me just share my screen one last time. Just a reminder about our webinar next week on the 19th, How to Ask Your DNA Question with Bonnie Belza. That'll be at the same time Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. So we hope to see everyone there, and have a great day.